Hi, everybody. My name is Constantine Limberakis, VP of Product Marketing here at Determine. And as part of this procurement revolution discussion, I was pretty excited to be asked by a few of my colleagues to talk about the topic today, which is the leading edge of future of procurement. So before I jump into that, one of the things that was interesting to me is the notion that they chose the word revolution as part of this change. And so, revolution, I think, as I guess a historian, or I guess one that claims to have studied some history, revolution by its very nature causes disruption. And as part of this theme, we're really seeing that there are forces that are driving procurement into high gear. And what this will mean in the next 5 to 10 years is really hard to tell. But we could really briefly examine what those disruptive forces are and try to look at what those forces are and glean into what that future will look like. And it's pretty clear and obvious to us that what those forces are. So let's kind of go through that and see what we can glean from that and see if we can get some idea of the future of procurement. So one of those is really the notion of big data. So more data is being created today than any time in history. In fact, from a job creation standpoint, some of the estimates show that there's 4.4 million IT jobs being created around the idea of big data. And the idea of the question is okay, well, how do I leverage that? How do these resources best utilize this information? And I think one good way to break it down is based on the way an IBM study does it, is just by looking at four criteria: volume, variety, velocity, and veracity. So their point there is first of all, the volume of data is intense. And they say that most businesses today create about 100 terabytes of data. So the question for procurement is how do we take that 100 terabytes, the components that relate to suppliers or to purchasing or to invoicing or the aspects of procure to pay or source to pay, and how do we best glean that information? How do we extract that? Another is the variety of the data. There's just so much more types of data that are being created. Anything from the social media that's out there to news feeds to information coming on stock indices related to global stock markets. So the variety of data is there, and then the velocity of that data, of how quickly you can absorb that information into your procurement organization, is very critical. How quickly and how timely is that, and what does that mean for the end users or for the practitioners that are trying to best leverage that for knowing what to buy? And then finally is the veracity. The veracity is how good is that data, and that's always been the challenge. Is the cost of bad data. In fact, in this study, I think they said it was like $3.1 trillion that it's costing businesses a year because of the usage of bad data. So how do you filter that, and how do you get that to a point where that you get good data? Finally, another area that I've been seeing quite a bit of discussion around is material design. And now this is more of a technical term, but it's really a concept of interest to a lot of the developers and graphic designers that are out there. And it's something that's near and dear to our heart here at Determine because of what we see and what that's becoming. So from an end user perspective of the future, how do I engage my customer, my internal stakeholders, to really onboard and start using the technologies that I want them to adopt to improve the compliance and the processes that I have for procurement? And this idea of material design is certainly something that is every day in our lives, something that we see. And how often do we ask from our personal experiences, where is that button, or how does that look change, or how seamless these changes are that are happening on these technologies? But it's something that the minute that they see it, it's intuitive, and they know exactly what to do and where to go and how to move on with their job function. And I think that because this is an idea being proposed by Google, it's a concept that's going more beyond just the idea of being responsive and saying I can have an application on an iPhone or an iPad. It's actually going into the ability to create, and this is the quote that is from Google's site: material design is a visual language that actually synthesizes classic principles of good design with the innovation and possibility of technology and science. And for the purposes of procurement, that really means, how do I translate something that's intangible on the screen to allow people to get their job done quicker and do it for procurement in an easier way. So that's another area that we're seeing from the future of procurement. Finally, the mobility. We've all experienced this ourselves. The influence of B2C on B2B is incredible. The other day, I was with some of my colleagues, and we were updating and enhancing the iPhone app that we have for our platform. And the fact that we are doing this in an Apple iTunes environment is just boggling to me. The sense is that your kids or your friends or even yourself, you go out there, you download the latest app that you want, and you're doing this on a personal level. But the notion that we're doing this now for business is just something that's completely transformed, and again is one of these disruptive things that is happening in technology and business in general. So being able to pick up a business app on what was traditionally a B2C medium really demonstrates how technology is transforming. And for procurement, this means increasingly being aware of these consumer-driven approaches that will increase the adoption of the technology to ensure that you're getting this purchasing compliance while really providing the value to the business in terms of the realized cost savings and efficiencies that you're looking for by using technology. Another force that we're seeing, and this is again part of this bigger picture, is self-service. This notion that I came across self-service was first really in the analytics world of understanding how do I drill down easily in getting from one screen to the next, of understanding what information is being provided. This notion of self-service is something we again use in the consumer world. You can think of going to the airport and clicking and going to a kiosk and downloading your ticket, or going to the ATM and understanding all the details of information that you normally had to go to a teller. And even to the point now, if you go to places like in Indianapolis, where we're headquartered, where you have Blue Indy, where it's a company that you can actually rent a car, an electric car, from a parking meter, and do everything on the go. So translating that into the notion of business technology and procurement in particular, how do we imbibe this type of idea of self-service so that users can easily go through a process of purchasing in a hyper Amazon-like experience? How do we, from a procurement contract standpoint, how do we enable these workflows so that somebody who needs to create a basic contract like an NDA or a basic contract for purchasing items and not have to go through a legal or a procurement process that will bog them down? So these are ideas that where self-service is really becoming part of the core of what we're seeing is driving the future for procurement technologies. Another is then finally the idea of the expansion of the cloud, right? The cloud is ubiquitous, it's everywhere. We really can't measure the influence that it has sometimes because of how pervasive it's become. But there are certain key elements of the advantages, and it's becoming a precondition to move forward with technology, and an idea of on-premise is really something that's is again in the past. So what is the cloud providing us, whether it's in procurement or in general from technology? It's providing us an economies of scale. It's reducing the spending on technology infrastructure. It's streamlining processes. It's improving the accessibility so people can get on anywhere and at any time. The ability to monitor status and projects, and just really creating an environment of flexibility that was just unprecedented in having to deal with traditional on-premise environments. So when you're looking at some of the statistics there, what's really interesting is, companies, analyst firms like Gartner are even going as far as to say that, by 2018, the idea of public cloud or a public cloud environment for procurement will be mission critical. This notion of no cloud policy will be what they say is something as rare as a no internet policy. In terms of investments, they're saying that 30% of the largest 100 vendors' new software investments will have shifted from cloud first to cloud only. So this has really become a transforming and disruptive aspect to how we, from a procurement perspective, want to be able to allow organizations to use our technologies and get them to a place that mimics the rest of where data is residing and where data is, again, as part of this big data question. And then finally, one of the last points they make is that they predict by 2020, 95% of cloud security failures will actually be the customer's fault. So this notion of security in the cloud will be fading, and it will become more of a user error type notion as opposed to an issue that the cloud itself has as an issue. This brings me to the kind of final and last aspect of where I see the future is this confluence of all of these factors that I just brought up, expansion of the cloud, expansion of the self-service, the mobility, the material design, the big data. And we're seeing this in the form of the evolution of the idea of a suite. So we're dealing in a postmodern ERP environment, meaning technologies that have been deployed to manage enterprises, say back in the 90s and the early 2000s, are now being re-looked at or reconsidered as part of the confluence of these different dynamics that have taken on. Even back in the day when I was working at Aberdeen, one term that they were using was SOMOCLO, I think social mobile cloud. So that's another dynamic of that. So bringing all these together and now migrating these elements, we can really see that it's changing the dynamic of how organizations are using procurement technology. And what we see here, procurement solutions, call them source to contract or source to pay or e-procurement, however you want to break that down. There's not an exact science there. What we need to do is be able to meet the needs of many with functionality across so many different diverse work streams. So this often really poses a challenge for people that are, whether they're in purchasing or they're on the AP side with invoicing and payments, or dealing with supplier management or contract management. All of these groups have these unique processes, and these will need to be incorporated within a wider spectrum. And so the notion of having a suite in the cloud with these dynamics really helps organizations adjust to these changing needs in business globally. And we're really finding that in the end, this is what brings all these elements together, and what is a way of driving the future of procurement, and it's really become a part of this way of enabling the revolution for procurement. So thank you so much, and this has been a great opportunity for us to talk more about what we're seeing in technology and what's going to be happening.